Coogs House. Um, what was that on Saturday?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below how you spent the rest of your Saturday. I hope it was better than what happened on the field for the Houston Cougars. Houston lost to Cincinnati, if you were under a rock or just now checking in, 34-0. And frankly, you could argue it wasn't that close in embarrassing fashion over the Big 12 play. Today's show was brought to you by Game Time. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Get in the game. It's Game Time. More on that later if you want to get tickets to the game this weekend. But we got to break down what happened in this game. I also want to talk about the Big 12 as a conference because it is a fun conference to be a part of. And while Houston starts off 0-1 this year, and an embarrassing way to go about that, obviously it's a fun conference. Got to bounce around a little bit about that. I'll know about a mantra that may be failing for the Houston Cougars. That is the Cougs beating the Cougs, because that seems to be what they're doing. But first and foremost, I mean, what happened? So we mentioned Houston loses 34-0. And again, it didn't really feel that close. And I think I had a couple bullet points here as far as taking notes go. This is the reaction show that typically will happen sometimes post-game, but people wanted it later at night on Saturday. And then honestly, if you can't tell, we're in a new place here, moved into a house, which is nice. Nice living in a house. But that Saturday got away from us after that. So this is reaction part one. Part two will come out later today. And my bullet points from the game, my note sheet here, which I took on my phone, which is now on my computer, is that there was apparently no offensive game plan in this game. As I'm charting things, it looked like 21 passes were attempted, only 13 got completed for a whopping 92 yards. Now, if you remember from this game, 52 of those 92 yards came on one deep shot to Joseph Manjack, which he actually, fun fact, had to bob a little bit. Other fun fact, Manjack had that long 52-yard catch, but finished with 51 yards because his other catch was for a loss of a yards. On the whole, this game was not a great game through the air, to say it nicely. Donovan Smith had a lot of trouble, was benched in the second half with different fanfare for whether or not that was deserved. I will say this much. If the game plan involves short passes for no yards after catch, it's not going to go very well. This was not the short passing game from like the Oklahoma game where guys had space out in front of them to go run. This was short passes into coverage with no one open downfield. And I don't mean that excuse the poor play from Donovan Smith, because he played poorly. I do think, though, that a lot gets put on his shoulders, and frankly, nothing that was being called appeared to work. Sanford out of the back, the Rashawn Sanford starting running back, had a catch of 15 yards. Joseph had 15 yards after catch on one play. Joseph Manjack had 16 yards after catch on a different play, the big 52-yarder. The entire rest of the team had just 15 yards after catch combined. That means guys aren't able to get open when they're getting the ball out because they're getting tackled shortly after catching the football. This is not the same thing we saw against Oklahoma. I want to stress that. What we saw against Oklahoma, and kind of what worked against Rice, was Houston kind of like spamming the zone play, running it over and over and over again. In this game, there were about 27 designed carries, and they were not more or less all zone plays. There were sweeps, there were gaps, or block down, kick out kind of stuff. There was a mixture of things, and it makes me think, okay, so why did we run all of that zone? If you spent all that time working on it and it worked against Rice, and then you don't run it again, what did you just wasted all that time. It just doesn't. I don't know where. Again, I'm a big person and a big proponent of offensive football. You have things you hang your hat on, things you repeat and do well over and over and over. And it looked like against Rice, that was going to be the zone. And it looked like between combining the Oklahoma and Rice games, you're going to have a combined like zone, and the way that sucks the defense, it was going to get a little spit out passes that turn into big gains after runs after catch, right? Yards after catch. None of that carried over. And it just felt very poorly run offensively. Getting away from what you did, throwing the ball backwards. Again, multiple pass plays. I was texting, I'm not going to say who it was. I was texting someone like 1 degree removed away from the whole thing throughout the game. And we were both commenting that there were several series in a row where they ran several pass plays in a row that went for negative yardage. That's not successful football at a peewee level, right? Like that cannot be the way that's designed to happen. It's awful. It's just awful offense across the board. The TV guys, and I have no reason to think that they were wrong, or they're wrong on other things, said this was the first P4 team to be shut out this season. I think that's fair and valid. I think last year when Houston lost to Kansas State in a very similar feeling game, that Kansas State was good, so that was part of the other problem. I think that they said that at that point it's the first time Houston been shut out in like a bajillion years, since like Texas in the early 2000s, right? Like it was a long time. And then you get shut out just frankly a few games later. It's been a year, but a few games later, really, really bad offensive game. I want to talk some about Cougs being the Cougs in the second segment. So some of that is the offense as well. And then we have another show coming out later today. We'll talk more schematics and stuff. I've done a little bit of note taking on some more analytical kind of things for that one. But really, really just bad offensive game plan, top to bottom, and then it was poorly executed. And then you turned the ball over. It was all bad. Houston's defense is kind of getting, I don't want to say like let go on the blame here. But I do think that Houston's defense getting up 34 points was not on my bingo card. I thought, again, this was and I maintain, frankly, if Houston plays their best ball, this is a winnable game. They just played that poorly. And I think that's okay to say. And I don't think that's, they played that poorly. Sometimes you have bad days at the office. That was an awful day at the office. Not that they can't win that game. But in looking at the defense, I think the defense getting a little bit of a pass because they were the people that Houston fell back and leaned on in the first 3 games, right? And they played very well, frankly, I would say, for all but about a quarter of those first 3 games, right? And that quarter really was kind of like the end of the first, start of the second quarter of the UNLV game. But you feel me, right? Like they really, I think, played pretty well by and large. And then they didn't play well against Cincinnati. And while they did look like they got figured out at times and they had trouble covering Xavier Henderson in one-on-one matchups, they couldn't get help over the top to help out with that. And they got zoned to death, it felt like. Also, I would say when you lean so heavily into one side of the ball for success, whatever success you want to call Houston having had in the first 3 games, when you lean that heavily into one side of the football, then you're opening yourself up to these kinds of games because other teams practice and watch film and study too, right? It's not fair to expect one side of the football to be the 85 Bears every single week, right? I mean, the 85 Bears are the 85 Bears because they did that. That's like not a fair expectation. Now, obviously, the coaching staff's going to hold them to that, but realistically, as a fan and a commentator, like that's not where it's going to be. You're opening like defenses are going to have some weeks where they just have a bad week, and frankly, they allowed 24 points in the first half, were on the field for most of the first half, and then only 10 points in the second half. A competent offense against a Cincinnati defense that has a lot of holes in it should have scored more points. I mean, they missed a field goal in the red zone. They had 2 turnovers down there as well. Had those turned into points, this feels a lot different. And instead, it feels really, really crappy. I want to talk some in a second about kind of how the Cougs are getting away from a mantra that was supposed to be their guiding light this season. But before I get to that, I do want to remind folks today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. America's #1 sportsbook makes games more interesting. And these days, for NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You get a hunch in the middle of the game. You can kind of check out the latest stats, view play by play, and so much more when you place your bets on FanDuel.com. You can start with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you put your first $5 bet down at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. America's #1 sportsbook right now. As we're recording this, they got Iowa State favored by 13.5 with Cougs next weekend. The over-under set at 43.5. If you are mathing the math there, they are not expecting a whole lot of points to be scored in the third ward. If you think you can make that more interesting, go to FanDuel.com. All right, so I like a lot of things about Fritz and the staff coming in, and so I want to stress this as this is poor execution of almost as poorly as I said that, poor execution of some good ideas. Not that they're bad ideas, but there's been a couple things that Willie Fritz brought in with him as kind of mantras. He wears "play through the whistle" (PTTW) on his shirt, and anyone's coached football knows that like what you mean by that is like we're going to play until the end of the referee's whistle, through the whistle, right? Because that's how long the play lasts. The play lasts from the snap until the end of that whistle, and we need to dominate that entire 4, 5, 6, 12 seconds, right? Whatever that is, right? The entire time, play full speed the entire time. That's a Fritz thing, right? The other thing he brought with him, I'm sure he had it at Tulane, I'm sure he had it at St. Houston, I'm sure he had it everywhere he went. But very quickly, early on in spring practice, he was saying the Cougs don't beat the Cougs. That is to say, you don't have self-inflicted things happen that will spoil your Saturday afternoon, or in this case, your less than 3 hours. The game took less than 3 hours, by the way. That's incredibly fast to take a butt kicking. And anyway, the Cougs are not supposed to be the Cougs, according to Willie Fritz. And there's a number of ways that would happen, right? Penalties, turnovers, bad reads, bad decision making, poor communication. I'm not writing a checklist of things that happen on Saturday. I'm saying these are things that are not supposed to have happened to the Houston Cougars. Instead, the Cougs absolutely beat the Cougs on Saturday. 2 fumbles in the red zone, both by freshman running back, redshirt freshman, Rashawn Sanford. I will say, had he held on to even one of those fumbles, he's probably player of the game without a doubt. Ran the ball very well, caught the ball in the backfield very well. Instead, 2 fumbles gave up the ball when Houston was kind of marching it in scoring opportunity, right? If those 2 things turn into touchdowns or field goals, we're not talking about the second shutout since 2000. We're not talking about the awful opening. We're not, okay, offense is sputtering. We found some points, got to find some more. Instead, it's like, what is going on here, right? Awful interception by Donovan Smith. It looks like he threw a pick over the middle to Boogie Johnson. Looked like he thought Boogie Johnson was going to cut more of a flat in route on the deep crosser, and Boogie kind of curved it to more like a post or a deep, like angled crosser. Maybe a misreading the coverage. A lot of modern football is receivers and quarterbacks being on the same page. And it is a new offense. I've said before, Donovan didn't play in the spring because of the injury. There are no preseason games. We are a third of the way through the season now, but growing pains. But even if that was as simple as I thought this, you thought that kind of misread, the ball was thrown to Boogie Johnson in bracket coverage, right? And it wasn't like they threw it out in front of him for him to run away from them, regardless of the angle of the cut. He had a guy underneath him and a safety at the top of him. And that's not a ball that needs to be thrown. Now, I know in the first segment I was saying that they threw too many short passes to guys that were not open. That doesn't mean the solution is to throw the ball to deep guys that are not open either, right? Like that doesn't negate or make right those mistakes. That was a bad decision. It was, right? And I don't really know what to tell you on that. Could Boogie have cut it under and maybe made a pass breakup like a defensive back? Sure. Is that his job? No, right? Like it's just not. And it was a bad decision. I've seen Donovan make a lot better decisions in his first year in the Houston Cougar uniform. It was a bad one. Um, they had a couple other plays too that could have been fumbles. Donovan tripped over his right tackle's foot. It looked like to me at one point, tripped on the grass, the slipper at one point too. But when he tripped over, I think it was Wiley's foot, scrambling out of the pocket, he dropped the ball. That could have been a fumble, could have been awful, right? Bad ball, right? And so you're talking about at least 3 times you gave a possession when you didn't have to, twice down inside where you could have scored. You also, on Cougs being the Cougs on the other side of it, had, I believe I counted 5 defensive or special team penalties that gave Cincinnati a first down when you might have gotten the ball back. And that leads to points for Cincinnati, right? Cincinnati had 34 points. Yeah, again, it makes you think like if you pulled out 6 or 8 plays of defense, Houston really played a pretty strong defensive game for a lot of it, but extending drives, right, leads to wearing down, leads to getting run over. And then, you get down in the red zone and they have a great receiver. They get him in one-on-one coverage and they win a couple of those, right? Now, I'm still taking Latrell. I'm still taking McCutcheon. I'm still taking Latrell is McCutcheon. I'm still taking our guys, though, more often than not in one-on-one situations. That guy that won twice in one-on-one situations with no help over the top, right? If this game were 14-0, we could talk about fixing that. This game wasn't 14-0. There were a lot of other mistakes being made in this game, and those mistakes start with these penalties on the defense side of the ball. Houston totaled 7 penalties that were accepted. I think they had another 1 or 2 that were not. In any way, regardless of the situation there, you can't as a coach. It's hurtful, painful as a coach to be preaching things like the Cougs don't beat the Cougs, we can't shoot ourselves in the foot, etc., 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 only then to have your team shoot itself in the foot like this over and over and over. Right? Willie was he looked gassed. Like after the game, he looked just like beaten down. Like he didn't know who those guys were out there. And to be fair, I think that stands as the worst performance the team's had this season, especially when thinking about the caliber of opponents. Cincinnati's not great. They got a better quarterback this year. Their lone Big 12 win last year was Houston. And we thought we fired that Coach Holgorsen to move on and do better this year, right? We remain, I guess we should say, Cincinnati's only Big 12 football win. They've just done it twice now. And, are Cincinnati better than this year than they were last year? Sure. They have a couple guys that look pretty good. Corey Kiner is 5'9", but he looks pretty strong at the zone read stuff. Sorsby, when you give him a bajillion years to throw the football, can sling it around a little bit. Xavier Henderson, again, won a couple really competitive one-on-one matchups. We know Dante Corleone. We talked about him this year and last year. But as a whole, right, what hurts about Cougs being themselves this game, and I've gone on too much droning on this already, is honestly, and I said in the first segment, this game was winnable. On a talent versus talent perspective, when Houston's playing their A game, they are able to win this game, even on the road, right? Donovan's best self from last year, the guy that threw, was it 12 or 14 straight completions to come back and beat West Virginia, right? When you've seen Rashawn Sanford break on the open field and Parker Jenkins break on the open field, I mean, he has been non-existent through a few games now, right? We've seen Boogie Johnson make a lot more guys miss and get open, wiggle open, right? We've seen this defense stand up and not make those mistakes and penalties. When they're doing those things, they win this football game. Instead, they didn't, and so they didn't. And that's unfortunately the way it went. And if I'm sounding frustrated, it's not because, Parker got the take wrong and now he's pissed. It's not that. It's that there aren't that many of these games where you can outright win by just bringing your A game on the schedule anyway. Houston's got a crazy difficult schedule. They're going to need some things to break right in other games to win them if they're going to. If they play as poorly as they did on Saturday, they're going to go 1-11. If they play that poorly the rest of the year, they're going to go 1-11. They're going to have to play better. Period. And it doesn't get easier with Iowa State on Saturday. I want to talk some about the rest of the Big 12 because at least then we can laugh some. Before we get to that, if you're trying to get tickets to the Stros, the Rockets when things start up, Houston Cougars this weekend, or comedy, concerts, theater, whatever you're looking for, Game Time has the best prices you're going to find for tickets. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks, which makes getting tickets easier for your favorite live events. It filters out all the fluff. You only have incredible deals for great seats. You don't have to look at any other kinds of wasting time. Get to the nitty gritty picking your seat to get all in pricing. You can see what it looks like from that seat in that venue for that type of event. Lowest price guarantee means you get 110% credited back to you of the difference. You can find tickets in the same section in a row somewhere else for less. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Turn to play again. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, now back here with Locked On Cougs, and we're going to bounce around the Big 12 a little bit because I do think it's worth saying that this conference is both crazy in the sense that every game could be winnable. Lots of weird things happen in this conference, but also in that there were some funny things that kind of, I think, maybe covered up what happened to Houston. Like I love laughing at Baylor. Don't get wrong. I just like laughing at Baylor. And to give up the Hail Mary there at the end, they had Colorado on the ropes. They got after Shedeur Sanders. And to give up a Hail Mary at the end of the game, to then go to overtime, and then to lose in overtime because you fumbled it out of the end zone. I mean, that's pretty good. That's pretty funny. Had him on the ropes, couldn't do anything about it. Frankly, there were moments that game, it was late game on here at our house. I can say our house now. It's not an apartment, it's our house. You had him on the ropes and you turned it, you just turned it off. You turned the game off early, stopped playing early. It was bad. Almost as bad as what happened to TCU after promoting on social media on Friday. They were going to have to play this game on the CW because the ACC TCU went across the DFW Metroplex to SMU and lost in a game that I guess we kind of both which could have both lost. They lost kind of embarrassing fashion. Sonny Dykes thrown out of the game, off the field. Something about Dana Holgorsen on your sideline, I guess, in that game. Kansas fell apart. Lost to a West Virginia team that had not been a power team this year. I guess it was in Morgantown, but Kansas was like a dark horse pick to win the league at the start of the year. And they're really falling off a cliff. Maybe that's a winnable game later that I didn't have as winnable in my initial picks and standings. They let the Garrett Green comeback happen, but forgot the part where Donovan Smith throws the 50-yard bomb to win the game or something. That was bad. Arizona State, after starting off 3-0, kind of is who we thought they were, right? To quote great Dennis Green. Ugly game, but they and Tech both looked beatable to me in that instance. The two games I thought were the most interesting from a beatable, not beatable instance were Utah and Oklahoma State. Utah looked every bit the part. That game, they beat Oklahoma State 22-19 in Stillwater. And for what it's worth, 22-19 implies the game was a lot closer than it was. They were 22-3 at one point in the fourth quarter of that football game and kind of just went to prevent, don't lose the game kind of mode and almost let the comeback happen. Utah was in control of that one a long way. Looked pretty good in doing. Again, not like unbeatable good, but did look good while doing it. And then Kansas State, who I think on the Big 12 squad show early on, I picked to win the conference. I liked a lot of things they do up there. They went to Provo and got spanked, 38-9 at halftime. It was 17-6 and 11 points. You get the 2-point version. It's really a 2-score game. I was kind of telling myself with that one, that was in the quad box as well. That was a late game. And part of the reason Cougars After Dark couldn't happen so late on Saturday was because that game went so late. I thought coming out of halftime, Kansas State was going to kind of turn it around, turn it on, right? This thought was going to be like, okay, Kansas State's going to come out of halftime, get their talking to, wake up, scores touchdown to open the third quarter, their first possession in the third quarter, and kind of get it rolling. And kind of the exact opposite of that happened. Like I want to stress, like that is legitimately as opposite as opposites can be, seem to be what happened. So Big 12 had a bunch of games where teams looked very, very beatable. And I feel pretty good in saying, like, honestly, some games might take one or two things breaking their way, but Houston, if they play their A game in this conference, does not have to go over the rest of the way. Does not have to go 1-11. This is not a conference where they're outmatched in any of that. TCU, Baylor, Colorado, Arizona State, these teams are beatable. They're not all on Houston's schedule. We mentioned Houston's got a crazy difficult schedule as well. But look, BYU put it on Kansas State. So I understand that's on Houston's schedule, but Kansas State has shown they can lose these kinds of games. Kansas, we all thought was going to be a crazy difficult game to start the season. That's looking more and more winnable. And you're playing them at Arrowhead, which is, I guess, technically a home game for Kansas, but also kind of a neutral site game in a weird way. I think more of these games look winnable than maybe a month ago. But over the course of last month, we've seen Houston become their own roller coaster. And the problem that presents is if the Oklahoma Rice Houston shows up, we can beat a lot of teams. It couldn't quite beat Oklahoma that Saturday, but we're close. We can beat a lot of teams. If the Cincinnati Houston shows up, and maybe Cincinnati just has their number because they did it to us a year ago as well, then maybe we don't. And that's the unfortunate thing. We'll keep breaking down here each and every Locked On Cougs. A lot of fun stuff this week. Another episode comes out later today, breaking down a little bit more because we couldn't get to you late live on Saturday. But another episode will be out later today. Got basketball recruiting news, a gigantic recruiting weekend coming up for Houston in terms of what could be on the table. We're only, I guess we're a little over a month out from games in basketball. Got to preview Iowa State, talk about how to win that one because, by every Friday I've talked myself into a win and you should too. We got all kinds of fun stuff going on here. So each and every day here at Locked On Cougs, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell so you know we're live. If you're looking for a second listen and the second episode has not come out yet today, go check out Locked On Big 12 and see what Drake's got cooking on the entire conference. Locked On Cougs, primarily Locked On podcast. Now it's your team every day. Go Cougs.